recording. This is the Tombigbee Tales. I'm your host, Shannon Evans, and I write about a small town in northeast Mississippi on the Tombigbee River called Columbus, and sometimes I write about the rest of the state. Tonight's episode is about one of my author friends and my favorite writing accountability buddy, Julie Whitehead. Julie, thank you so much for coming on the show, and I'm just so thrilled to share about your new book that's coming out, Hurricane Baby.
Yes, ma'am. I'm looking forward to talking with you too.
Well, Julie, tell us a little bit about history about whatever you want to share about you and your writing journey and what got you into writing Hurricane Baby.
Let's see. Writing probably came on my radar about age 8. I was always checking books out of the library. I'd been an early reader, and my mom never monitored what I checked out. Neither did the librarian. And I remember checking out a book one day that talked about the newspaper industry and how newspapers were made and how articles were written and how you gathered research for articles and just all this interesting stuff about this job that I never really thought very much about. I read the commercial appeal at my grandparents' house, the Memphis paper, that's what my grandfather took, and I was just fascinated with the whole idea. And that's when I decided I wanted to be a writer, specifically a journalist.
So
And I
is your
continued in that.
undergraduate? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead.
I continued in that. I did some work with the school newspaper at school, what we had, what little bit of one we had. I always did well in English class and writing papers. And I started in college at Mississippi State University with a major in communications with a journalism emphasis. The actual journalism degree in Mississippi is at Ole Miss, but I didn't want to go to Ole Miss. I tried it and didn't like it. So I went to Mississippi State and I graduated from there. And then I got a master's in English lit and took creative writing courses. I was just trying to soak up as much as I could about writing before I got out and tried to do any of it. I took a state job once I got out of college. I spent a year teaching at Mississippi State after I finished college. And then I spent several years in a state job. And in 2000, I started freelancing for various publications. And that's pretty much the kind of work I've done ever since. It was as a freelancer in 2005 that I covered Hurricane Baby. I was in Jackson, Mississippi when it came through. It was a category 1 hurricane when it came through Jackson, Mississippi, which is about 150 miles inland. That's unheard of.
Uh-huh.
And we were not damaged in as far as our home or anything like that. My kids were off school because their school was damaged from the winds. And I was in the house with 3 small children under the age of 10, writing articles about Hurricane Katrina and what people were going through. And I got the idea to write a different kind of storm story. A lot of what we were seeing coming out of the coast were because news means what doesn't normally happen, were stories about resilience and about the community coming together and about people who had lost everything but their family and said that that was enough, that they were all right with that. And I got to thinking, what about the people that aren't all right with what they've lost? What about the people who maybe didn't lose anything physically or any people, but the hurricane affected them psychologically in the same way it affected me. It was a very scary time in Mississippi when this happened because I believe I read a stat a while later. All 83 counties in Mississippi were affected from the coast all the way up to Tennessee. There
Wow.
wasn't a single one that didn't have damage.
I did not know that.
Yeah, it was a tropical depression by the time it got to Tennessee. So that
Holy
tells you
cow.
how strong it was. And I just got to playing around with the idea of what kind of circumstance could I use to send somebody around the bend in a hurricane situation. And I came up with one of the plot lines in Hurricane Baby, which is the Wendy Judd Ray plot line. Wendy and Ray are a married couple. He owns a hardware shop, but to balance out the ins and outs of working for yourself, he had a partner. And he also worked as a first responder. He was a fireman, professional fireman.
Mhm.
And Judd was a character that came on the scene. He worked with Ray. As he was a salesman, selling heavy equipment and worked with Ray with his shop. And Judd came to Hattiesburg and got stranded. He couldn't evacuate up to Grenada where his wife was. He couldn't evacuate back down to Louisiana. So he stayed with Ray and Wendy at their house until the storm was over. And while Ray was gone during the hurricane, Wendy and Judd had an encounter. And that really kicked off the whole idea of what do you do when conventional morality does not cover the situation you're in?
Huh.
And the whole idea of why do we do the things we do? And what happens when we don't know, when there's no reason? And those are the kinds of themes that are explored in the rest of the story. Um, there are 4 storylines in this iteration of the book, the one's being published. That's one of them. Another is Mike and Dinah Seabrook. Mike is a head nurse at Slidell Memorial Hospital, and he loses a guy to heat exhaustion, which is very deadly, but very simple to treat. And he decides he's fed up with losing people under his care. So he goes to work for FEMA, Federal Emergency Management System, to try to help more people get back on their feet.
Hmm.
And Dinah's his wife, and they have 3 kids. The third story is Tommy Hebert and his girlfriend, Cindy De La Fosse. And Tommy goes on search and rescue, amateur, in Metairie, Louisiana, and he comes to a scene where there's nothing can be done for the people buried in the house they're in.
Ooh.
They do get it's a woman and a child. They do get the baby out and get him to a hospital, but there's nothing they can do with the girl, with the mother. And he starts drinking. So that kicks off and he never had drank before. So that kicks off the action in that storyline. And the final one is James and Lori King They were from Kenner, Louisiana, and they evacuated up to Noxapater, which is close to where her mother lives. Evacuated to her house. And Lori was pregnant by about 4 months. And Lori has a miscarriage after the hurricane, which is a very common event. And while she's having a miscarriage, James is down in Kenner trying to see what kind of damage there was to his house. There wasn't any damage, but it had been looted, and the looters had shot his neighbor who was trying to protect his property and killed him. So those are the kinds of stories that came out of all this thought I was putting into what do you do when there's no good choices.
Uh-huh.
So that kind of becomes the central idea of the book is how do you live when all the choices you have are bad and you can't stop making bad choices.
So did you see similar stories like this in Katrina, or
No, none of these actually happened.
but were there similar like humanity was uh at a lack of humanity, so to speak.
Oh, now that you did see. Now there was a lot of there were places in Jackson where there was gunfire over ice. Ice was at a very big premium to people trying to keep their freezers going
Uh-huh.
without losing all the food they had. And that got down to where people were shooting at each other over bags of ice.
Uh-huh.
And that was pretty terrible.
Back
Um,
ice. Wow. I was at that point I was working for a university in Utah and I was living in Salt Lake City at that point.
mhm,
I couldn't get in touch with my family in Columbus or Jackson for about 5 days.
right. Phones were out, and cell towers were down all over the state. Nobody
Oh,
could get through. It was very difficult. Um, you kept hearing stories, but again, because we like to tell ourselves stories of hope, they would percolate up things that went well. There was one gentleman that we heard a story about down in New Orleans. You know those big jugs of water they used for water fountains back then?
yeah.
For the water dispensers?
Yeah, yeah.
He took a jug of water that size, took it to the priest, had it blessed, and poured it around his house and his business, and neither suffered a scratch of damage.
Oh, wow.
But that wasn't where I was going with what was in. That's not in the book. That's not the kind of story I was looking at. I was looking more at what wasn't being said
Uh-huh.
out loud. And you knew it had to be happening because we heard so many stories coming out of the Superdome. And you didn't know if they were true or not. But just the idea of some of what went on there was very disturbing.
So that
And I
so that
decided to stray away from anything that I had actually heard, told, or heard on the news and just write something new.
not connected to your book, but connected to the story of the hurricane.
Mm-hmm.
Remember the man who had the nursing homes and then he evacuated all the nursing home people and put them in a warehouse. And most of them died because of heat exhaustion and
Are
abandonment.
you talking about five days of memorial?
Yeah.
Okay.
That man's estate is going up for auction.
Mm.
I went and saw some of the items. it blows my mind. I mean, he owned the chair that Huey Long was assassinated in. He owned millions of dollars in artwork that he had gotten in he'd bought in Europe in churches and cathedrals that no longer are churches or cathedrals. The amount of just things he had are phenomenal. And to think, what could he have just used out of his own millions to have actually cared for those people
Right.
and just done them right?
Right. And I think that ties back to what I was saying about the fragility of conventional morality, because when something like this happens, to my understanding, rational thought flies out the window. It he may have been evil and didn't think of how to take care of those people, but also in the middle of it, when you are there and you are looking at these people and the water is rising, that's probably not something you're going to think about. You're going to think about trying to get them out as best you can.
You would think.
Yeah. And maybe that's the best he thought he could do, because there were no evacuation routes out of New Orleans at all. Um, I knew somebody that dealt in heavy equipment that went down to the coast in New Orleans, and
Huh?
they had to have police escort. So their trucks wouldn't be robbed of what they were
Yeah,
carrying. That sort of
that's an unbelievable time.
thing. It was.
So where were you during Hurricane Katrina? Where were you living?
I was in Brandon, Mississippi, right outside Jackson.
And what did y'all encounter in that storm?
Um, well, we I took it more seriously, I think, than anybody else did, because that's just my personality.
Uh-huh.
And I remember sitting in church and the preacher was talking about what was coming and was leading a prayer service and talking about what the church was already doing to try to get down there and help people who couldn't evacuate.
Uh-huh.
And I made a grocery list of what I could think of that we'd need to have if we were stranded or out of power, or lost our roof for a week.
Uh-huh.
And I told my husband we're going grocery shopping after this. And he kind of poo-pooed it. And I said, nah. I said, I'm not messing with this. I'm serious. And so I had a 6-month-old child. We got enough baby food for her. And then when the winds actually came, we didn't have one area we could congregate together. Me and my 6-month-old went into the closet in her room, and my 9-year-old and 6-year-old went into a closet in the 6-year-old's room, and they took card games and that kind of thing. They played a lot of games while we were waiting the wind out. And my husband was in the guest bathroom, half bath, across the other side of the house. And I took the baby's diaper bag and I filled it as much as I could stuff into it. Everything I thought that might be needed
Uh-huh.
in the days ahead: baby food, diapers, my wallet, my computer, my driver's license, whatever cash I could get my hands on in the house.
Uh-huh.
Because I knew if the power went down, you couldn't use a credit card to get anything. So that was where I was mentally with the storm. And I plowed through it, but not without cost.
What do you mean?
That was kind of the start of when I um started having a nervous breakdown, is what it comes down to.
Ouch. That is a high cost.
Hmm.
So after the storm, how long was it before Jackson went back to normal?
I think my girls went back to school the following Monday. It happened on Monday morning, and they went back to school the following Monday. They were able to fix the roof on the school that had been damaged.
Uh-huh.
And were able to clean up the tree damage everywhere else in the county. We finally got electricity back on a Thursday, and we had to move out of our house because we lost power.
Wow.
And we stayed there for 3 days. And then my husband's mother got power, and we had already seen the ill effects of the heat on our 6 month old.
Uh-huh.
So we went and lived with her for a couple of days until power came back on at our house. And then we got everything loaded up and moved back into our house, and the power went out again.
Oh no.
Oh, you have no idea. I called Entergy and I just lost it. Not screaming at them or anything, but I was just crying. I said, we just came back in from losing. I know y'all are in trouble. I know y'all have got your own problems, but we need power up here again too. And to get somebody over here to look into what happened.
What caused the power to go out again? Was it just an overload on the grid?
They speculation was that someone trying to help out dropped a tree on the line for our neighborhood,
Ugh.
but there's no proof of that.
Uh-huh. Well, let's get back to the writing of the book. When did you start Hurricane Baby?
3 days after Katrina, while we were staying with my mother-in-law, I was
Really?
drafting it in a notebook.
Oh, wow. So you were just writing it longhand to start with.
Mm-hmm.
How long did it take you to actually write the first draft?
The whole thing, 6 months, something along those lines.
So it just came quickly.
It did very quickly. At first, I just wrote a short story about Wendy and Judd,
Uh-huh.
and then I thought I was done with it. I thought I had it out of my system. I had it written. Yeah, I was done with it. And then a few days later, I thought, what would happen if Wendy wound up pregnant after that? And Judd wondered if the baby was his. And that opened a whole new can of worms for
Uh-huh.
the story. And I just kept asking myself questions like that until I had a 350-page manuscript.
Oh, wow. Whatever works.
Yeah,
That's amazing. So now tell me about shopping it. How did that work? Or first of all, you had to revise it.
right. The first time I shopped it, I had I actually found an agent who was based in Jackson. He's no longer an agent after the great publishing shakeout of 2009.
Uh-huh.
He lost all of his contacts. He didn't feel like he could do it anymore. But I heard about him from another reporter that I knew, and I contacted him, and he read it and just loved it and thought it could really go places. So he sent it to New York publishers, which there were more than just 5 conglomerates at that point in 2006.
Uh-huh.
And he tried really hard. And I got rejection letters from 19 very good publishers. And eventually I just shelved it. And in 2010, the fifth anniversary of the storm, I took the, or maybe the year before, I took the story up and I took the first three at that time, the first one, chapter one, chapter two, and chapter five of the book and wrote as a play.
Uh-huh.
And that play went on to win at the Eudora Welty New Plays Festival in Jackson,
Uh-huh.
Mississippi at New Stage Theater. They didn't produce it. They did a stage reading. They didn't produce it as a main stage play, but they did a stage reading, and I got a prize and a little plaque and all that good stuff. And I left it alone after that. I entered the MFA program with the W in 2015. And one day while I was taking fiction workshop, I didn't have anything to turn in. So I went and dug up the first part of the story all the way back to the beginning and put it in the um, class. And it had a very favorable reaction from everybody that read it. The one caveat was Mary Miller. She asked me, how do you make people care when there are people who lost everything about this couple that reacted this way
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't make any sense? You know, I guess she wasn't sold on the premise, but she's come around, and it was so that made me really think about the book some more. And in January 2022, I picked it up again and decided to toss all the boring parts and make it to where each before had been a chapter into a short story as best I could and write it as a series of interrelated short stories. And that's how it finally got completed the second time.
Huh. So that was when we were in class.
Right,
Cool. So then you finished it the second time and then you started shopping it around.
right.
Okay, how did it get picked up? Tell me that story. And who picked it up?
Madville Publishing down in Texas, who I had never heard of before I started doing this.
Uh-huh.
My way, I thought, okay, I have done the rounds with New York. It's worse now than it was then, as far as being centralized and what was being put out. And I thought, I'm too old to wait for them to do their thing. So I just decided to shop at two small presses, independent presses, and university presses. And I put together lists from various places, poets and writers, and AWP, different lists on the internet that listed out. I looked for people that took Southern fiction. I looked for people that took short stories, and that cut down on the list of who I could send to. But that was good because I would be sending to anybody that didn't want it.
Uh-huh.
And so that's what I did. Madville was towards the end of me sending it out. They had put not exactly a call for submissions, but they had said we're about to open for queries in summer 2003. And so in the 1st of June, I wrote, them a question, is it summer 2003 yet? In other words, are you open for queries?
Yeah, yeah. Are you open for query?
And yeah, and they said, give us 2 weeks. I said, okay. So I did. And I sent back, and she said, send me a query. I said, okay. So I sent her the query letter that I developed for it. And she came back and wanted the manuscript. She sent the manuscript to her acquisitions person, Mike Hilbig, in Texas, who had been a victim of Hurricane Harvey. And he thought a lot about it. He really thought that with the anniversaries coming up and with the way the climate was changing and the storms were becoming stronger and more going further inland, that there might really be a market for this particular work. He said, seems like more and more people are becoming victims of hurricanes rather than just the usual suspects on the coast. So he recommended it, and they offered me a contract, and I had it out to 20 other people at that point, but most of them were contests, and I knew they couldn't um take mine out of consideration for the contest and consider it separate.
Uh-huh.
There was one publisher that was not the case. I wrote to him and said, I've got an offer. Do you, what would you, are you in a position to counter offer? He said he wasn't. So after 4 days, I signed with Madville.
Oh, wow. So that was quick.
Hmm. I didn't have very many people to contact, and I just said, yeah, I've got another offer pending, and I was curious to see if you'd counter offer. And they just, one guy sent back he wasn't in a position to, and another woman said, that was one with a contest, and she said, no, we're not. Our contest isn't structured well. We can do that.
Yeah. So that was a good thing.
Yes, because I have loved working with Madville.
That's great. Well, so when does the book actually come out?
August 20th, 2024.
And what does that mean exactly for you?
It means that it actually ships to people who've ordered it.
Uh-huh. So people
It
can
should be
take
available in
pre-orders.
bookstores, that sort of thing.
So people can take pre-order. They can take pre-orders.
Yes.
Do they do it through their bookstore or how do they do it?
Well, it's live at Amazon and Barnes and Noble and bookshop.org and all kinds of places. Walmart even has it online.
Really?
Yes, I found that out tonight. Um, it's overseas. It's a lot of overseas online bookstores.
Really? Is it like English language or are they translating it already?
I don't think they're translating it. I think it's strictly the English version. What it is, what seems to be what's happened, my unscientific guess, is that Madville uses Ingram as their distribution partner,
Uh-huh.
and Ingram is a multinational corporation.
Yeah.
And so other groups that pick up on Ingram's releases have picked up on this book.
So what's your goal with this publication, with publishing this book? What's your big dream and then what's your immediate goal?
Big dream, I think as big as I dare let myself think, is that maybe it'll be picked up for a movie. I
Ooh,
think that would be interesting.
that would be cool.
Yeah. Um, as far as realistically, I hope I make some money on it. Um, I'd like to sell at least 5,000 copies.
Uh-huh.
I'm not sure how realistic that is, but it seems like a good round number. And I want to I want to get people thinking about this kind of fiction again because a lot what do I want to say? This kind of work doesn't seem to have as much of an audience as it used to. Southern Gothic,
Why,
Southern fiction
why do
in
you, why do you think
general.
that is?
I don't know. I think it's because the publication houses are multinational corporations and they have to publish things that appeal to a huge segment of the world.
Uh-huh.
And Southern United States lit is not really one of those things.
And
I
I
mean,
find that very
Hugo Welty
interesting
has her
because,
fans in France,
uh-huh.
and so does Faulkner. And I'm not going to put me up with them, but um, it's not it's not considered to be a big seller. I don't think. I don't hear a lot of people making a lot of money off of selling straight Southern Gothic.
No, which I find interesting because it's actually a universal story.
It is. It's just got Southern Gothic elements.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean anybody that's ever endured something like this will see it. Like Mike Kilbig did, the acquisitions editor. He said this is very real. Because he just talked about how he could see all this actually happening to somebody.
Uh-huh.
Whereas a lot of work is not written for, I guess, the ordinary Southerner to be able to read.
Well, that's interesting.
It's written for other audiences, but I'm not sure it's for just your average um Southern reader who wants real stories that sound like him.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of argument about representation in publishing and who gets to be represented. And Southern fiction used to dominate those lists,
Uh-huh.
and they're not so much. And some of it is because there's needed adjustments are being made to let other people talk.
Understood that, but a lot of people
Mhm.
still want, like, as I said, I can read a universal story is a universal story. It appeals, like, uh, why does To Kill a Mockingbird appeal to people around the world? It's a Southern Gothic story, but what is universal about that story that appeals across the world?
Yeah, the man's been um indicted for a crime he didn't commit,
Yeah.
and it's told from the point of view of a girl who's trying to make sense of that.
Yeah. So it's the downtrodden being it's the victim story, but it's the story of compassion
Hmm.
and redemption.
Yeah,
So why is have you read The Petrified Man?
that's Eudora Welty, right?
Yeah. It's the
I
one
know
that
about,
it,
but I don't think
it's
I've
the
read
it's
it
a,
in a long time.
but it's a short story about women gossiping and a man comes to town and somebody ends up pregnant and it's a circus comes to town, but it's the same story. I mean, we've heard this story before, but it's a bunch of women gossiping about each other it's a lot of tropes, but it's richly told. Let's think, why is a Streetcar Named Desire performed all over the world?
Yeah,
I mean, it's the same thing.
because they tapped into something that was universal. And I think that's true of any good literature, is that you don't have to be a certain sort of person to tap into what it's about.
I think that's why I like Jasmine Ward's stuff. I mean, I know it's magical realism, but her stories are all very real. The experiences of the characters are the magical part, but the characters are very real. Was it Sing? What's the name of
Sing
that one?
Unburied Sing.
Yeah. I mean, it's the children are victims of their parents, you know, stupidity and selfishness, and yet the children are magical and can see things in the world that their mother used to see, but she doesn't see it anymore because she knows she's lost her childlike innocence. And
Mhm.
so there again, it's a universal story, though it's told from a magical realism point of view.
What always comforts me is that someone told a long time ago there are only 12 plots in the world, and Shakespeare wrote all of them,
True.
and you just have to do the best you can.
That's pretty much it. It's the hero's journey, essentially, right?
Each one of these people come out of what happened to them different than they did. Whether it's a hero's journey or not throughout, I'm not sure. Um, Wendy, somebody asked me when I read at an event in February, somebody asked me, does Wendy get over her guilt? And I made the comment, I think you'll have to read the book to find that out, but we're getting close enough to release day. I can say, no, she doesn't. Um, Mike, he finally has his faith restored the same way he lost it at a hospital working. He had quit his work to run away from God, and he was brought back and redeemed. Tommy doesn't make it out of his addiction. He loses everything and doesn't make it out. And James and Lori, for a minute at the end, you think maybe they're going to patch up what they had, but they can't, because what happened between them was so hard and so difficult that they can't overcome it.
Mm.
So they're all changed from who they were before the hurricane.
Uh-huh.
Every one of them are, but they don't get over it. They maybe learn to deal with it or not, kind of like in real life.
Hmm. So what are you working on now? That's a loaded question because I know. Do you want to share what you're working on now or no? It's okay if you don't.
My current work in progress is, it actually came from a rejected scene in Hurricane Baby.
Uh-huh.
I had written a scene where Judd and Wendy's child came looking for Judd. And I rejected it because I didn't want to carry the story out that far to her teenagerhood and whatnot. I wanted to end it. But I'd written that scene, and I remember thinking that there's nothing wrong with what you've got here and the idea that you have. And so I set it in the 80s, and it's about a teenager, a 16-year-old, who finds out she's adopted and goes on a search to find out who her adopted parents are. And the story actually starts with the history of that situation. The first part of the book is written from the birth father's point of view about how the child was conceived and born. The second part of the story is about the birth mother's point of view, about what she endured after she gave birth to this child and what she went through in her life. And
Uh-huh.
the third part is about the teenager coming to find her parents and everything not turning out the way she hoped it would.
Hmm. So be careful what you wish for, kind of thing.
Yeah. I mean it's as dark as Hurricane Baby was, in some ways maybe even darker. But it ends on a much more hopeful note. I'll just say that.
What do you think you want to work on after your work in progress? Do you want to go back to writing short stories and plays, or do you want to keep doing full-length pieces or mix and match?
Um, I got a really good idea in the weirdest place ever. I was doing a sleep study, and I had this idea for a series of linked short stories about a mother and her a widow and her three daughters,
Uh-huh.
and how she wound up raising them, how they each came to a crisis point in their life, and how the power of family helped put them back together.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, that's one that I'm thinking about. There's a couple of others. I wrote like 6 novels during that time period when I was writing novels, and some of them I don't know if they're worth going back to or not.
Uh-huh.
But I know that's one new idea that I'd like to explore.
Cool. Well, that's, I hate I'm going to reveal our secrets. Julie and I meet just about every night. We started out, we were only going to do this on weeknights, and then we ended up, we both like to write, and we're both up at the same time writing. So our writing patterns match. So we're like every night we go, hey, it's 6:30, I'm headed in. Are you headed in? Yep, I'm headed in. Oh, I'm stuck. Or oh, I think I need to outline. Or oh, so we give each other encouragement. And sometimes it's a matter of more is better, you can cut later. Or sometimes you just got to write stuff to get their backstory just so you get it straight in your head. So she and I've been doing this for what, almost a year now.
Something like that. We good gracious. Maybe not. Did we start on it when I started looking for a home
You
or
were, it was in well, I know I read a draft of Hurricane Baby, and then
okay.
you had shopped it out to all the majors and you were ready to not do it. And I was like, well, just try one more time. And because I thought it was definitely worth it definitely needed a home. It was not something that should be ignored. And you had so much passion for it.
Yeah,
And then I've been over in this dark place trying to finish this book, this historical piece
yeah,
in a very dark part of our history, post Civil War Reconstruction through this just before the Civil Rights era. And so, I get into a point where I have to like go write about my podcast episodes or go do something else because I just get so dark. So it's always been good for me because I'll go up, write a podcast, or up, I'm writing for a client.
yeah,
So it's always good. I've always enjoyed having somebody that I can commiserate with when I'm stuck or You
Mm-hmm.
will
Same
laugh at me
here.
when I start taking myself too seriously because I have a bad habit of doing that. Or, you know, we can say, hey, go play with family, go enjoy family. It's nice to have someone that you can um more than just be accountable with. It's like we're our each other's cheer squad in a weird um isolated manner. So it
Yeah. The thing about the writing game is if you don't have somebody to talk to about it, you will run yourself crazy. Because, I live in my head a lot anyway.
don't
And
most writers.
so if I don't get out of my head with somebody and have somebody have the perspective to say it's not a disaster if you don't write that scene right now.
Uh-huh.
If you write a different scene or whatever other scene you want to do, or if you want to write on your blog about how miserable you are, whatever you want to do, it's not a crisis. Or a lot of times writing feels like a crisis when
Yeah.
you take it as seriously as you
That's an understatement some
do.
nights. I remember one night I said, I'm having an existential crisis. And you said, we don't have time. It's 6:30. Start writing. That was the appropriate response. Why don't you write about it? Well, I did. It became a short story.
Yeah.
Anyways, Julie, I always enjoy talking to you. I want to thank you for joining me tonight on Tom Bigby Tales. Um, Thank you so much, and I wish you the best of luck. And again, it's Hurricane Baby. Can you do pre-orders on Amazon already?
You can on Amazon. Just type in either Julie Liddell Whitehead or Hurricane Baby Stories, and it should pull up. You have to might have to dig a little bit for it down the list, but it should pull up, and you can order it from there, and it'll be delivered sometime after the 20th. However,
So can you
Amazon
order
does their
it from your
business.
own from your own website too?
You can. There's order links on my website. That's Julie, Julie, Liddell, Liddell, Whitehead, WHITEHEAD.com. Julie Liddell Whitehead.com. And you'll see order buttons
So
for several different
I'll
places.
put that in the show notes as well.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll put that link in the show notes so people can pre-order. And then once the book is available, is once the book comes out and you've done a few book signings and whatnot, would you come back on my show?
Oh, sure.
I'd love to know how the book signings are going, and we can get we can build some more excitement for your book. I'm just excited to watch you get everything out there and get published and make it all come true. This has been an exciting thing to watch happen for you, and I'm really proud of you.
All right. I appreciate it.
All right. Well, thank you again, and this is the Tom Bigby Tales.
Good night.